Well, Vincent agus déirgus gúnúis le léirbhálam ar dúspáirm a bhuichas go bháildíomh as tuchtán cuireadh bheith tránóna ag bhór chódáil náisiúnta, má bhuichas a gháildíomh as tuchtán méidibre tá buinte amach agah agus tá á dhéanamh agah ar fud na tíre ar san muinte na tíre agus chugáiríos a dhéanamh as tuchtán slua an a bhór atá agah I Bácan Crócaigh in Nuv. It's a particular privilege for me to be here this afternoon to speak at the Wheels National Summit, particularly at Croke Park, which is always a venue that I think attracts, stirs up memories, maybe hopes for the future, even though I am from Cork, and that's proven challenging in these days, but we're very modest people and we'll give it our best shot over the course of the summer. But I think also the fact that we're here in person, I think is further sign of the progress we are making in terms of bringing society back together with in-person meetings. And I've noticed it over the last month in particular at various events, dinners, whatever. There's huge enthusiasm for people to get back to in-person meetings. And that's important because whereas we did advance technology fairly significantly, I think all of us involved in, shall we say, meetings, whatever, or having to advance strategy, develop strategy, the in-person dimension is very important. Body language, exploring issues. Very often, sometimes the technology, the virtual conferencing, kind of leads to more stiffer sort of prepared presentations as opposed to the teasing out that we really need to do in terms of developing ideas and strategy. I certainly have said it repeatedly that the mood and sort of atmosphere in the Fianna Fáil Parliamentary Party improved dramatically once we got back to in-person meetings as opposed to the virtual ones, and other political parties say likewise. But for me to be here is particularly important because the community and voluntary sector is at the heart of everything we do in Irish society, and it's about fundamentally the people. And people from all walks of life doing extraordinary things. You represent all of that, the full spectrum from health to human rights to homeless to community advocacy. In many instances, this work is done quietly and in the background. And I want today to take the opportunity to publicly acknowledge that work and to thank you for the countless hours that you and many, many others who are not here spend striving to make our community, our country and our world better and a better place to live, and countless communities to enrich their quality of life. The sector spans the full breadth of Irish and, of course, international life also. You make a very profound difference to the fabric of our daily lives, and you have a positive impact, as I say, in a whole range of areas of Irish public life, from the environment to education and to health. Your work tackles social exclusion and poverty. Your work supports human rights and seeks a fairer world for all, and it enables us all to participate in and celebrate our rich culture and heritage. When I addressed you virtually last year, we remained in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and while we were unsure of what lay ahead, I was truly struck by the resilience and determination shown by the people and organisations that make up the community and voluntary and charity sector in this country. And throughout the pandemic, you played a crucially important role in our great national shared effort. You ensured that no one was left behind as you reached into every community in even the most remote areas of our country, helping to create a real sense of well-being for our most vulnerable citizens. And you were also an important part of the effort to provide the reassurance that was needed, that people were not alone, not forgotten, and that help was always at hand. And I know the COVID-19 Stability Fund for the community and voluntary organisations was very, very important in terms of sustaining organisations, but also in helping contribute to that endeavour. The various interventions we made in terms of trying to protect employment across all sectors, but particularly our own sector, I think brought significant lessons with it in terms of the interaction and the partnership between the sector and government. And I do believe as we emerge from the emergency phase of COVID, we do need to reflect on that and learn lessons from that in terms of how we work together into the future. And I know that Minister O'Brien has acknowledged and praised your contribution to our national well-being, but I also, again, want to thank you particularly for your heroic work during COVID-19, because it's easy now to forget the uncertainty, the fear, the anxiety of many within our community at the commencement of COVID and during different phases of COVID, because it was a once-in-a-century event. It was unprecedented, and that did take a societal response to deal with it and to address it as a country. And overall, as a country, relative to others, we did well in overall terms, notwithstanding the terrible, terrible impact that COVID had on so many families in terms of loss of life and suffering, and long COVID, terrible impact on our health services as well, which we're still feeling to the present days. And amidst the unprecedented nature of this pandemic and the definite trauma it brought to many, your work, I think, and the continued to bring light and to shine light on the situation. And as Desmond Tutu once said, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. And we are living through a period of history when hope, light and optimism are very, very welcome and very badly needed. Because no sooner, as you know, of course, had the pressures of COVID-19 begun to recede, then we found ourselves responding to an appalling, immoral and unjust war on the people of Ukraine, which has caused the greatest humanitarian crisis since World War II, with up to 6 million people fleeing Ukraine, with appalling inhumanity, levelling of villages and towns, and enormous trauma, particularly on women and children who've been uprooted from their communities and have to go all over the world. And again, I remain very inspired by the work of your sector and that many of you are undertaking in welcoming, accommodating and integrating our new Ukrainian friends from the terrible war that they are fleeing. And I want to assure you that government is listening to the feedback that you are providing. When I went to Mill Street recently, I saw it firsthand some weeks when they first came in, the Ukrainians who spent time in, who were in Mill Street. What was very striking was when I sort of said to them, we're doing our best to accommodate you and to help you. They stopped me in my tracks and said, no, you're not doing it, you're doing more than your best. We are overwhelmed by the kindness of your people. And of course, there was a very strong voluntary group helping them in Mill Street, as well as the Hallow, the IRD group as well, but also other volunteers and people in education. And it was just very striking to see that at first hand. Also to witness the trauma that the people themselves had gone through in terms of what happened to them in their villages, and they spoke to me about all of that. And really, we can do a lot in terms of providing resources, procuring hotels. You can do all that. But what people fleeing war need is people-to-people engagement. They need a community to bring them in. They need a sense of warmth, that there's people there for them in their hour of need. And I think your organisations and the members and the volunteers across the country, I think, have done that in a very human way that I think reflects the best of Ireland, of what we're good at in terms of our humanitarian response. And the terror still continues in Ukraine, and the nature of the war in Donbass at the moment is quite brutal in terms of its relentless bombardments and impacts on people. So I do genuinely value the work of the members of countless organisations throughout the country who are helping in the community. And that's why yesterday there was, government made funding available to community organisations through the Department of Community and Rural Affairs, and we'll continue to listen to feedback as to what's the best type of supports we can allocate to organisations that meet the needs, because every location can be different and every context can be different. Before any of this, of course, the work of partnership and mutual support had been well underway between government and the sector. Our current 5-year strategy was co-authored with the sector, and therefore set out a mutually agreed general direction of travel for government policy, providing an agreed vision for community development, local development, and the community and voluntary sector over coming years. This is an ever-evolving discussion, and I know that the potential for greater partnership between statutory bodies and the community and voluntary sector was explored in some depth already today. I'm particularly interested to learn about the opportunities for building on where it works well and extending this across the system, and also to deal with challenges that we collectively face. We already have a good starting point based on the NESC report on the community called Learning for the Future. One of the observations in the report was that changed working practices in and between statutory, community and voluntary organisations delivered improved outcomes. And this has important long-term implications as we engage with the lessons learned and incorporate them into the policies and practices for the future. Without the partnership between government and your sector, many people who need and are receiving support might not otherwise receive it. And that is one of the reasons why we are working to adopt an agreed set of values and principles for collaboration and partnership working with the community and voluntary sector at a local and national level. This important work is being championed by the Department of Rural and Community Development and my colleagues Minister Humphreys and Minister of State O'Brien. And the values and principles document has to date been shared with my own department, of Taoiseach, with officials in my own department, particularly involved in work on social dialogue, has informed the drafting of the local economic and community plan guidelines with the Department of Housing and Local Government, and is an appendix thereto, and was also considered as part of the consultation process for the new climate action plan, and has been reviewed and built on by the Department of Health Dialogue Forum, forming a framework for collaboration within that forum. And so the completion of this project, I think, will mark a very important milestone in strengthening the relationship between the state and the community and voluntary sector. I know that our shared aim is that these agreed values and principles will help foster an ever greater culture of mutual respect and understanding as government works with you to meet the challenges we face as a society. And I know that they will also be of great benefit as we collaborate, as I said earlier, to continue to work for those impacted by the Ukrainian war. I want to acknowledge, as Vincent has just referenced, and warmly welcome the leadership that the Wheel and the Northern Ireland Council for Voluntary Action have shown in taking forward an impressive Shared Island project this year. Your iCommunity Shared Practice Hub is bringing civil society together across the island of Ireland in a range of ways to explore common concerns, work together and showcase what works in communities north and south. This exemplifies the kind of meaningful, practical connections we need to grow across different communities and traditions on this island, and working to build a shared, reconciled future for all, underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement. The iCommunity Hub, Vincent, is a valued contribution to the government's Shared Island initiative, and I'm pleased has received support under our Reconciliation Fund, and where available through the Shared Island unit to continue to support further developments and further projects in this space. Because the Shared Island initiative is without prejudice to people's constitutional preferences. It's more pragmatically based on how do we share this island together, how do we solve problems of mutual concern, how do we develop together ideas, and I think the community and voluntary sector is ideally placed to facilitate that type of exchange, and also the emergence of new voices that sometimes are not heard in political debates, to reach down into communities, to tease out what people are thinking on the ground in various communities. And we've provided we've over $1 billion for the next 10 years under Shared Island, covering all sectors of life. And I think this is a sector that we're really enthusiastic about and want to work for realisable, implementable, cross-border projects on the themes that you cover. More generally, I think more and more policymakers and others are recognising the breadth and the reach of the community and voluntary sector and its value, not just in supporting our country's social fabric, but also in terms of its significant economic contribution. And one final area that I think is of crucial importance is the area of climate change itself. And again, it's interesting that the European Union Council meeting this week, the sanctions on oil in response to the war in Ukraine and to create pressure on the Russian Federation is interesting in a number of respects, because it was an immediate response to an urgent crisis. But in many ways, it's accelerating what we should be doing in any event to reduce dependencies on fossil fuels. So the war has created a huge sense of vulnerability across Europe because of its overdependence on Russian gas and oil. But overall, as a world and communities, we're over-dependent on fossil fuels. And it's very difficult sometimes to convey the immediacy that a war can bring, to convey that immediacy around climate change, because a lot of people see climate change as over the next hill, or maybe 5 years' time we'll get around to it. But do we really have to do it now, because it's too painful now and too difficult and challenging? And so I think for climate change, community where it has to happen, as well as within the framework of national and statutory policies, and we've produced the legislation, the Act is there, which creates legal obligations on the state. And likewise, the Climate Action Plan is there. We have the National Climate Council, and a lot will flow from that. But at its heart, addressing climate change is about changing human behaviour, all our behaviours, in terms of how we work, how we play, how we travel, everything is at stake. And therefore, you're again back to the community and voluntary sector. It does have a pivotal role to play. And I saw that in Glasgow at COP26, when a group from the Dingle Peninsula arrived to Glasgow with a guy representing a lot of farmers in the Dingle Peninsula. And they're a particularly enterprising community group in Dingle with very strong ambitions around energy efficiency, better methods of production in terms of the kind of agriculture and so on. And I said to him and Ryan afterwards, look, we need to grab, excuse the phrase, quite a number of these community-based projects and really develop them and resource them as exemplars for other communities to follow. I was in Ballyphehane in Cork recently, where again a local community group is developing a climate action initiative, particularly around retrofitting, around the community centre itself becoming a model for, and is the first community centre in Cork to develop this initiative. And again, we have to, because I was up there and I kind of said, what's the state doing? And we gave half a grant, whereas we could have given a full grant, but there was some regulatory usual sort of said, well, you can't give the full grant. So we need really proactive engagement around these kind of concrete examples of where community groups are taking a lead. Others will follow if we resource it adequately at the start and give confidence and hope to people. And that's how we really, I think, collectively achieve the targets we simply have to achieve in respect of climate change. John Kerry, the US envoy, was in Davos last week, and he spoke to a lunch at the Washington Post. And he made a very sobering point that some of us say, well, if we manage the 1.5, we'll avoid the crisis. And he said, no. What the experts are saying is we avoid the worst consequences of the crisis. In other words, there are going to be very significant, severe impacts already from climate change. The challenge for us actually is to avoid the worst excesses. And it's our children's children will suffer the most from the expert advice we've got at government. So I didn't mean to dwell as long on it, but I do think it's a crucial issue for us all collectively, and your sector can help enormously. This conference is a very important opportunity for us in the political sphere and policymakers, not simply to listen, but also to participate. And I think the relationship between government agencies and the voluntary sector and the social economy is hugely important to our society and to our economy more broadly. I welcome the launch of the Leadership Academy this morning as a tangible outcome of the priority we have placed at national level in upskilling our workforce. And I welcome the creation of this model for leadership development in the sector as a positive outcome of the National Training Fund's work. And again, there is space and capacity within skills development, within the funding we have provided around upskilling, and the creation of the new government department, which was one of my key objectives in terms of further higher and innovation and research department, was to give a more focused approach at cabinet level around human capital, the development of the human being and individual, progression between different frameworks, And we have a very good framework now overall, but there's significant funding there, and I've no doubt that Minister Simon Harris would be, and Minister Niall Collins would be very responsive again to initiatives from your sector around that skilling agenda. And I know Minister Harris is working with the OECD in the context of a review of our national skills strategy, and I would encourage you and the community and voluntary organisations to fully engage in that process so as to ensure that the new strategy works for all our current and future workforce. May I say that the government I lead is committed to continued open and transparent engagement with you in the pursuit of these positive outcomes, and I intend to continue this work through the establishment of a national civic forum for discussions with the sector later this year. And I know that the Department of Rural and Community Development is leading this work. My own department is fully supportive and engaged in the process. Hapig me an deis norig mo bhuichas a chur an úildíomh go léir as bhór dacht in dír dúthracht agus obair chrua. Cuir man bhuichas ó chrí sin in uile ríis in nómh haar cheann an rialtais agus haar cheann bhuinter na héirden. Déanam cogádas liv a méadtá buinte macagriv agus an tionachar a imrín sibh agus táimig súla bheith obair goú leis an airnáil sna míana agus na blianta atá le teacht. I want to thank you and congratulate you for all that you've achieved over the last number of years, for the impact you make and continue to make, and I continue to look forward to working with you in the months and indeed years ahead. Go to Micheál maith agaibh go léir.